Our first reading is from 1 Samuel chapter 3 verses 1 to 10. Now the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord under Eli. The word of the Lord was rare in those days. Visions were not widespread. At that time Eli, whose eyesight had begun to grow dim so that he could not see, was lying down in his room. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the temple of the Lord where the ark of God was. Then the Lord called, "Samuel, Samuel." And he said, "Here I am," and ran to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." But he said, "I did not call. Lie down again." So he went and lay down. The Lord called again, "Samuel." Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." But he said, "I did not call, my son. Lie down again." Now Samuel did not know the Lord, and the word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. The Lord called Samuel again, and a third time. The Lord called Samuel again, a third time. And he got up and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." Then Eli perceived that the Lord was calling the boy. Therefore Eli said to Samuel, "Go, lie down, and if he calls you, you shall say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" So Samuel went and lay down in his place. Now the Lord came and stood there, calling as before, "Samuel, Samuel." And Samuel said, "Speak, for your servant is listening." Have you ever listened to politicians speaking and noticed that quite frequently they talk complete gibberish? There are a few reasons for this way of what I'm going to call pseudo-communicating. In the first instance, if what you say doesn't make sense, you can't be held accountable for not doing it. Then, if you speak rubbish for long enough, eventually I will either get bored and go away, or I'll decide you must know what you're talking about and that it is too complicated for me to understand. The strangest thing to me is that the public, that's you and me, put up with it. So the politicians talk gibberish and the public accept it as normal. Unfortunately, it means that when we're confronted with someone who speaks the truth, we're unsure what to do with them. It's almost like we've become unable to discern the gold from the surrounding rubble. I'm going to read you a fine example of nonsense literature written by Samuel Foote. It somehow sounds normal, but when you pause to think about what it means, you realise it makes no sense at all. Oddly enough, it fits into its very own category of literature, which includes writers like Lewis Carroll with Through the Looking Glass and Edward Lear with The Owl and the Pussycat. Some of you will be familiar with The Grand Panjandrum. So she went into the garden to cut a cabbage leaf to make an apple pie. And at the same time, a great she-bear coming up the street pops its head into the shop. What? No soap? So he died. And she very imprudently married the barber. And there were present the Pickaninnies, and the Job-lilies, and the Garrulas, and the Grand Panjandrum himself, with the little round button at the top. And they all fell to playing the game of catch as catch can, till the gunpowder ran out at the heels of their boots. The point I think the writers of these things are making is that anything can sound reasonable on the surface, but it is only as we begin to think about it that we understand meaning or lack of meaning. I suspect our story of Samuel carries some of these overtones. Eli had become used to not hearing from God, so much so that when God began speaking, he did not recognise what was going on. I find myself wondering if the word of the Lord being rare was that it was actually rare, or that people had ceased to listen. They'd become so used to the nonsense that had grown up through the times of the judges that God's voice was obscured by the litter of competing voices. Eli didn't recognise God's voice because Eli had ceased listening for it. I wonder if perhaps we're so enamoured with the polyphony of nonsense voices around us, news media, celebrities, politicians, social media, that we too have ceased listening for God's voice. if perhaps God continues to speak, but we have lost the ability to discern what God is saying. What do you think? Our second reading is from the book of John chapter 1, verses 43 to 46a. The next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip and said to him, "Follow me." Now, Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him about whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus, son of Joseph from Nazareth." Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" It's not only our sense of hearing that can lose clarity and discernment. We live in a highly visual world that is constantly flashing images at high speed, inviting us to ever newer and more exciting experiences. Let's look at two clips from a couple of movies, one released in 1943 and the other in 2023, 80 years apart.
With the coming of the Second World War, many eyes in imprisoned Europe turned hopefully or desperately toward the freedom of the Americas. Lisbon became the great embarkation point, but not everybody could get to Lisbon directly, and so a tortuous roundabout refugee trail sprang up. Paris to Marseille, across the Mediterranean to Oran, then by train or auto or foot across the rim of Africa to Casablanca in French Morocco.
I'm coming with you.
Okay. Wow, this is the real world. What's going on? Why are these men looking at me?
Yeah, they're also staring at me.
If this got out, this could mean extremely weird things for our world. This would be catastrophic!
We haven't played with Barbie since we were like 5 years old. Oh.
No one rests until this doll is back in a box.
Even if nobody else sings.
The speed of movement, the speed of speaking, the music, the cuts, the colour, everything about them demonstrates how much faster everything is moving today than it did 80 years ago. That's not all bad. The problem we face is the deluge of information is huge. It's like trying to get a drink from the Aratiatia spillway in full flood. Most people cope with that flood of information by reducing it to a trickle. One of the ways we do that is by making generalisations. Rich people are greedy. People wearing hats are bad drivers. Poor people are lazy. These are all generalisations that enable us to make snap judgments about other people without having to think about the implications of what we're saying. They're also almost universally untrue. One bad apple does not make the whole barrel sour. Nathanael was applying a generalisation to the idea that Jesus was from Nazareth, because Nazareth was a lower socioeconomic part of the country, which is saying something for an area that was caught up in poverty anyway. It was easy to simply say that anyone from Nazareth was poor, probably uneducated, powerless, and unable to add any value to society. He couldn't see Jesus for who he was because his filter prevented him from seeing the real person. With apologies to my congregation who often accuse me of asking them to think too much, I want to suggest that we don't think enough. And because we don't think enough, we fail to see Jesus at work amid the flashing deluge of images that rush past us at great speed. Have we lost the ability to discern Jesus at work because we've stopped looking closely enough? What do you think? Our last reading is John chapter 1, verses 46b to 51. Philip said to him, "Come and see." When Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him, he said of him, Here is truly an Israelite in whom there is no deceit." Nathanael asked him, "Where did you get to know me?" Jesus answered, "I saw you under the fig tree before Philip called you." Nathanael replied, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." Jesus answered, "Do you believe because I told you that I saw you under the fig tree? You will see greater things than these." And he said to him, "Very truly I tell you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man." I want to suggest a good thing and a bad thing from Nathanael's experience meeting Jesus. The good thing is that he saw Jesus for who he was. He was able to discern the truth beyond the generalizations and lost practice at listening. He was able to see past the societal expectations of this man from Nazareth and discover the Son of God. What an amazing experience. The bad thing is that all that was necessary for Jesus to get his attention was to tell him he had been seen. Nathanael knew what he was looking at, but his misconceptions and preconceptions, his generalizations and stereotypes, his lack of practice and discerning meant that he didn't see what he was looking at. I find myself wondering how often we see Jesus at work around us, yet fail to discern what it is we're looking at, because all of our own misconceptions and preconceptions get in the way. We all have our Nazareth story. How can anything good come from there? It may be a place or a person or people. It may be a lifestyle or a set of personal preferences or the way someone dresses. We see, we judge, and we miss what God is doing right in front of our eyes. I picked up a young man hitchhiking from Dunedin to Christchurch a couple of weeks ago. As we talked, I discovered he DJ'd for dance parties and raves. I learned a lot about a part of society I know very little about. Now, don't get me wrong, I suspect I would feel most uncomfortable at one of his dance parties. It's just not how my world turns. But upon discovering that I'm a minister, he made a most interesting comment. He said to me that his parties attract people from a wide range of society, not all as young as you might expect, employed and unemployed, highly skilled and unskilled. And he thought that the church had something to offer that those people longed to hear. More than that, that the church could listen because those people longed to be heard. All we had to do was to turn up without our misconceptions and preconceptions and listen, then perhaps speak when asked. Perhaps that is the lesson we can take from Nathanael today. What do you think? We pray. God of words, you said, "Let there be light," and there was. God of images, you met Moses in a burning bush. We confess that sometimes we are blind in one eye and don't want to see out the other, deaf to everything that does not fit our particular view of the world. Forgive us for the times you have to repeat yourself over and over before we hear you. Forgive us for the times when, like Nathanael, we have to be confronted with our misconceptions before we ever see you. Teach us to be discerning about all the mental candy floss that washes over us, and to hear and see you at work around us. And let us be a part of that work, even as we notice it. Amen.